Chapter 3 Elbows, Knees, and Boots. You can overhear a great deal while hiding in alleys. I preferred barrels, but it didn't matter much whether you were under a cart or behind crates. You just had to be quiet and hidden. I'd gone for a different approach this time. I was sprawled across the alley, kissing cobbles, as they say. I'd spent the morning holed up, reading Shape of Mind under Bethany's blinkless gaze. Most tutors changed professions or caught a cold after a few sessions with me. Bethany was a stubborn sort, and this morning she'd vowed to keep me in that chair until I could recognize Alzaman's 5 streams of thought. I'd spent the first few minutes learning about hunters, helpers, healers, hiders, and howlers. The next hour was devoted to wearing Bethany down. She was nearly as old as Mimi, and seemed in no rush to enjoy her remaining years on this side of the grass. Finally, I gave in. She may be content to twiddle away the day, but I wasn't. I rattled off the definitions and was finally released. In 20 minutes, I found myself face down on cobblestone, something cold wicking into my sleeve. I could have borrowed a nice barrel for my excursion, but those streams of thought had gotten me thinking, much as I hated to admit it. I was curious. I looked like any drunkard drowsing off too many mugs, and I wondered how someone would react. Which stream of thought would emerge? Would I be hunted for coin, of which I had none? Or would some healer make sure I was all right? I also hoped Bethany might become alarmed at my scholarly fervor and decide to tutor another pupil. Most importantly, I was just bored. And so here I was, an edge of stone patiently biting into my knee. A lump of something was wedged under my shoulder. I hadn't picked the most comfortable patch of stone, but that was all part of the performance. I was already soaking up some unnamed liquids, so I focused instead on soaking up the scents and sounds. This alley had the usual earthy musk you'd expect, but there were exotic, fruity notes too. No wonder. The building beside me was Violet's Vale, one of the finest taverns in all of Woden. Folk at the higher tables drank Winnow's wine and Mintwood brandy. Even at the lower tables there was good ale and plenty of leaf for the smokers. All free. Folk at the Vale paid with conversation, not coin. I could see one high window from my humble view, and it was no surprise that a steady arm of smoke reached up the side of the wall. I also heard the murmur of music. I watched the crawling smoke for some time before I was mugged. It was all quite casual. The man whistled his way down the alley before pausing beside me. He reached down to my coin pouch like he was scratching a cat. He shook it, sighed, and left. He didn't even bother to check my other pockets, or the soles of my boots, or under my tongue. Sure, I didn't have a pop to my name, but it would have been nice for him to give me a little credit. He was the laziest thief I'd ever met, including myself. He was turning the corner when I heard the sound that changed my life. The music that would ultimately move me to bravery, stupidity, and all the rest. Her voice was the faintest whisper through the window. Too soft for words, just the gentle drip of honeyed sounds dancing through a song. I'd heard nothing like it. I needed to see her. In a moment, I'd gained my feet, rounded the corner, and barreled into my thief. "You!" he cried, but I was already pushing past him toward the crowd bubbling at the front door of Violet's Vale. The signpost showed the lazy form of a curling purple veil. The clot of people blocking the door was as varied as they came, all in my way. Bankers, farmers, cobblers, cooks, musicians, and noblemen, all with the goal of getting through that door. My goal. And time was running. What if she was gone before I saw her? The doormen were thick and unmoving as trees. The 2 men were planted beside the door as plea after plea assailed them. "I made lady soup this morn. It's a story." "You drink Hill High Ale?" a stocky man asked. "Course you do. Well, thank me. I was involved in brokering the deal with Lady Reeve to provide Hill High here at the Vale." One of the doormen turned an eye on the young man. "Really? Chevalier lets no one near his deals. The young man turned red. Well, I still drove the ale here, didn't I? The doorman shook his head and waved the man off. It was like water. Others flooded toward the new opening. I broke a bone this morning. I broke 3. I dug up a troll tooth. That caught appropriate attention, and I couldn't help but pause. The woman was dirty from the elbows down, apron spackled with dirt and clay. She held something lumpy and yellow overhead. It looked vaguely like a small helmet had been overlaid with earwax and left to dry in the sun. Both doormen waved her forward. For a moment, I considered trying to slip by while they were focused on her, but the single door was too narrow. Even for a sprightly lad like me, there would be no sneaking. Not through the door, at least. My eyes turned back toward the alley. I was back under the window, breaths of the girl's beautiful song drifting over the rumble of conversation around the corner. 20 feet of pockmarked stone stretched between me and the window. The grooves between the stone were almost non-existent. Poor handholds, excellent workmanship. I cursed Lady Reeves's seemingly inexhaustible wealth. She'd even hired the best masons for her new rumor mill. The only mason I needed was one that was 20 feet tall to hoist me up there. I settled for climbing. I was not the best climber, and this wall was not the best surface. I hoped the two would cancel out. Just in case they didn't, I rolled a cart of molding food scraps under the window. A ladder would have been better, but there were only a few barrels about. With my safety plan firmly in place, I began to climb. At least, I tried to. I positioned my feet and clung to the meager handholds with all my strength. I reached, grabbed, and pulled, but my weight suddenly pulled me off the wall like a barn door, and I flopped into my rotten vegetable pool. Now, the back of my purple shirt was wet as well. No matter. I squelched free from the cart bed, clambered up to my starting position, and took a breath. I could still hear her, but I sensed the end of the song coming, just as you can sense the end of a conversation you've only just overheard. My fear lent me strength, and I made it another 5 feet up the wall before my foot slipped. Then I slipped. Then I was back in veg. Her song trickled to an end as I splattered into the cart for the 4th time. I rested there, defeated. Bits of tomato and apple peel sprinkled my arms. Something very sticky had collected in my hair. Juice dribbled over my shoulder. I was wild. Wild was strange. Strange was interesting. And interesting was passage. When I rounded the corner, I doubt even my thief could have recognized me. My hair was slicked back into several dark horns. I looked like I'd just tunneled through a garden bed. Folk moved out of my way. No credit to kindness. I smelled like I'd bathed in slop, which I had. I was soon standing before the doorman, fumigating proudly. Need coin? The first asked me. Just a chair. The second man chuckled. Then take a seat. You're not even the dirtiest beggar today. That's kind of you, but I have a date inside. The first doorman didn't bat an eye. He pulled out a list of neat script. The list of everyone in Woden currently granted a seat in the Vale. Name and tier? Not sure on the name, I said, but she was on the stage. The other one snorted. He's never been inside. Thinks folks sit on the stage. My odds of seeing the girl were plummeting by the second. Look, she was just singing a moment ago. I'm to recruit her for a performance at the Den. The second doorman leaned in as close as he could before my full stench hit him. You're the Jester's boy, ain't you? I saw a show last week, but you were cleaner then. What's got you in this shape? No name, no entry, the first said, looking up from his list. Off with you. The second gave him a look. Just let the boy stand. You don't need a table. The man looked like a goat who'd just been told grass caused indigestion. He hunched over his list, mumbling, No standards for standing. Let's just let anyone through, why not? A pen appeared in his hand. Davis Jester, I said. His face was quite red when he met my eyes. "I'm not an idiot!" His pen now clenched like a dagger. The other one eased the tall door open, smiling apologetically. "The list can make him get funny. Go on and stand in the back there. At least you're in." I was in. "Thank you," I said, turning from the door to Violet's veil. The tall, open room was split into 3 tiers, rising toward the stage. A tall, shifting veil hung in the center of the stage, hiding the musician. Tables packed each tier. Bracketed torches lined the walls. Gleaming walls of dark wood. Lady Reeve had spared no expense. A few smoke windows created a crosswind to suck out smoke and inject fresh air into the room. I imagined it smelled like an apothecary shop. Perfumes, musks, leathers, spices, all dancing through the music. I hardly spared a glance to the man now performing some ode of King Minya. She had left the stage. I was standing on the second tier in the middle of the room, and I began walking down toward the back as the guard pointed me. With each step down the gentle stairs, the patrons to my side rose higher and higher. Their laughs grew quieter, the twinkle of their glasses dimmer. The lowest tier involved more thumping, roaring, and drinking, often in that order. I kept walking, and that's when I reached the back. The back turned out to be a crowd very much like the one I had just left. A milling, hungry group waiting for an opening at the low tier. There were a few such empty seats right now. A heavy-set man in silks nodded to himself and strode toward a table of 4. His smile was wide and plastered. "Say, I'm Bosenthal. Aren't you a merry bunch?" The men at the table looked anything but merry, and it wasn't long before Bosenthal excused himself. It was like social jousting. Opportunist after opportunist charged the empty seats with their best compliments, jokes, and threats before stumbling away in mumbles. Actually, it was more of a social siege. As I observed more failures, I wove through my crowd, asking anyone for a description of the singer. Most looked at me blankly. Their focus was on the tables, not the entertainment. They were here to earn a place, not enjoy the scenery. Still, I heard from someone she was light-haired. Another said dark. A nervous-looking man said she'd been wearing a golden dress, or maybe it was just a robe. So hard to tell from the distance. After hearing another 10 contradictory descriptions, I determined this group could not be my compass. A few of the tables seemed to enjoy the sport of turning newcomers away. But the more I watched, I realized one table was bending beneath the onslaught. The only similarity between the 4 men seated there was their collective frustration, as folk like Bosenthal interrupted them. These men were having a great time, broken only by the pesky interruptions. I could stop those. "Wish me luck," I told the guy beside me. I strode up to the table and plopped into the empty chair with a sigh as though this were my bed. Their conversation stopped. I sank into the chair, leaned back like a nobleman's son. I did not ask permission or approval. I did not explain why I was worthy at their table. I just nodded to each of them. "Davis." The largest of them smirked. "Plucky. I ought to haul you out myself." He was a middle-aged man, robed in handsome cloth, and gleaming brooches in the noble style. He smelled too clean, like he'd eaten a bar of soap. But for all that, there was a dirty twist to his smile. "Easy on him, sir," a younger man said. "For one, he ain't kissing your boots. Ain't kissing your nose, either, if I'm frank." The man was only a few years older than me, with bits of straw still tangled in his hair. He reached over to shake my hand, and I felt the strength of his grip. "Bren." "Wallace," the 3rd man said, waving absently in my direction before turning back to the well-dressed noble. "But really, he raises a point. Should a man take greater pleasure in his station or his senses? I've given this consideration, of course, and I must disagree with the premise entirely. In fact," the noble slammed his fist so hard I jumped. You've been selling to the philosophy students again, and they have no idea. The two men burst into laughter like this were an old joke. Selling like mad, Wallace wheezed, holding his considerable gut. Oh my, I'll need some more soon, once you're ready. Once you've paid, the noble said, humor vanishing. It seemed Wallace would disagree. Then he grinned. For the good Sir Harister. Harister? I knew the name. The aged knight turned swindler. The telltale clink of dally kissed the air as Wallace passed something under the table. Gold has an unmistakable sound, especially when you have none, arresting as the sound of splintering wood to a sailor, or the cracking of glass to a chemist. I was in no danger of begging, but still, I felt the gold shift hands. I made a show of inspecting the table to avoid revealing how obvious the exchange had been. It was round, worn, and the proper size for 3. We were 5, so Bren sat to my right, the unnamed man to my left. In the center of the table sat a pitcher of wine and another of ale. The higher tiers, I noted, had several more jugs to choose from. Still, not many would complain of free drink. Beside the drinks was a small bowl of ground-up leaf. The tall candle burning in the center of the table was ringed with unlit, finger-length candles for lighting pipes. Another jingle as Harister slipped the coins somewhere safe, and he clapped the 4th man on the shoulder. I'd recruit you too, Gray, if you could speak. This brought another roar from Harister and Wallace, but Gray, the last man, merely knocked back a tumbler of something that could stain boards. He was gray from neck to boot. The colorless, parched cloak and pants that have seen too much sun, too many years, and not enough washing. He smacked his lips appreciatively and drew a flask from his coat, splashing a bite of brandy into the tumbler. Gray smelled of pine and smoke. I was unsurprised to see the hilt of a dagger at his side. He didn't earn a living with flowery words like some did. His next swish of drink went down, and he produced a fat-bellied pipe. He transferred leaf from the table's bowl into the chamber, added a little more. Then he took one of the smaller candles, lit it, and started his pipe. Off he goes, Harister mumbled as Gray took a long pull and sighed into himself. A lutist began to play. Harister focused on me, seaweed eyes calculating. Right, so why's a boy like you in the Vale? Fortune and friends, I said. And a girl. No trouble in that, Bren agreed. If I may, Wallace said, you look in need of all 3. What else is there? Harister grumbled. You all could help me with the latter, I said. There was a girl singing just before I came. She had the most beautiful voice. Did anyone see her? Blonde, wasn't it? Bren said. Harister's arm snaked across the table and slapped Bren. Shut it! You sweep stables because you don't have a mind for business. Never give what could be bought. My family always swept. And once you find a horsewife, your kids will sweep too. Bren folded over his mug, unused to the sharp tongue of nobility. I wasn't. Easy on him, I said. He's worked harder than you and me put together. A bit of the disgraced knight's old temper burned. Careful, boy. I've got a walking stick that works fine. Care to see? And how much iron is in this one? I immediately regretted the words. Harister's mouth opened and closed, a nasty purple blooming across his face. I don't know what you mean, he finally bit off. From the look on Wallace's face, neither did he. He didn't even know who Harister really was. After winning a great deal of dally and fame at a tourney, Harister had been found with iron-reinforced lances, much stronger than the standard tourney lances of Ashwood. The champion's gold had stayed with Lunestone. The nobility received a show and a juicy story. Everybody won, except Harister. His fame had quickly turned infamous, though it seemed his story was less known outside the castle, at least with Wallace. Harrister and I seemed to realize the same thing together, and with a great deal of effort, he relaxed back into his chair. I let out the absent-minded huff I'd been practicing for the next performance. Iron. I'm so used to speaking about it. I've spent the whole day in the apothecary weighing iron. There's an entire barrel that needs to be sorted, weighed, and cataloged for... I drew a name at random. Talabaster's work. Curious, Wallace said, giving Harrister the sort of sly wink that is painfully obvious to everyone else. And what, my good boy, does this iron go into? I'd never been in an apothecary. Mostly iron shavings, iron powder, anything with iron, really. Wallace licked his lips delicately. Does Talabaster specialize in any nutritive enhancements? They sell themselves, you know. My part was obvious. Is that so? Quite so, quite so, he said, eyes flashing in triumph like any man closing a deal. In fact, Sir Harrister and I have experience in this realm. I do, Harrister butted in. He was smirking like a cat in the sun. The worst had come and gone, and I'd covered for him. We were not allies, but I was no longer his enemy. I was just a means to coin. He leaned forward. I've developed a potion of vitality, something that can strengthen the young man or protect the old from sickness, keep the blush in a woman's cheek, even sharpen the mind from our tests. That sounds like magic. Bren choked into his mug, and Wallace flopped onto the table like he'd been shoved. No, not in the least, my good boy. He glanced around to make sure nobody had heard. We've done this all well above the table, I assure you. I do. We're actually hearing very positive reviews from students at the university. Yes, the very antithesis of magic. The Hail Pale, Harrister said, with the proud look of a man introducing a child or a good woodworking project. It's changing lives, and we're only just getting started. I would never mean to imply, I said. I only meant this Hail Pale sounds completely remarkable. If I could only butter them a little more, I'd hear about my mysterious singer. And how would one acquire a potion like this? Above the table, I mean. That's what's best, Wallace said. We deliver top-shelf nutritive care from the comfort of your home or stable or wherever you are. It couldn't be easier. So they had no storefront, and it seemed neither had a house suitable for public life. Amazing! Let's get you squared right now, Harrister said. Folk usually pay per bottle, but I like the look of you. I want to give you a month's supply right out the gate. They paused as if I was supposed to say something. The lutist had ended, and a harpist began to pluck her way into the next song. But Harrister, Wallace said, a boy like Davis can't stand 10 dally. Harrister gave me the widest, greediest smile. I'm offering a whole month for just 3 dally. What do you say? I was too shocked to speak. 3 dally was a ridiculous sum of money to ask of any 16-year-old, let alone one as filthy as I was. I couldn't imagine what they'd rob from a cleanly adult. Even at my rate, they only needed to find a handful of fools a month to make a good living. Wallace hurried to cover my speechlessness. But that's too generous. He could sell each bottle at market value and make 3 or 4 dally over his investment. I implore you, rescind your offer, Harrister. It doesn't take an actor to spot bad acting, and this was atrocious. I was curious to see what they'd do if I stayed silent. The script always ends somewhere. But I relented. Let us drink to that, I said. I didn't have a mug, so I waved to a serving girl, and after a quiet exchange, received a tall flagon made of a wood so dark it was nearly black. To our health, I toasted. And we all, Gray especially, took a healthy drink. Bren had also recovered now that the conversation was returning to safer ground. I sighed and smacked my lips with the rest of them. My flagon, as always, had water. A jester, even a future one, should have a clear mind. The thing about dark flagons in ill-lit taverns is they cast every liquid as some sort of deep red wine or heavy ale, whatever prop was needed, or whatever excuse. The flagon met the table with a weighty thump. Am I glad for the Vale today? I'm dirty and coinless. I'd be thrown out of any other tavern before I even got in, but not here. Coinless. The words stiffened Harrister and Wallace. A quick look between them, and Harrister said, "There's no place like it. So much opportunity, climbing these tables." He looked toward the silver tier, and his eyes were not envious, but furious. Opportunities. But you need connections first. Agreements. We're all friends in these walls, Wallace said. Making enemies is poor sport if you wish to sit with gold, or even silver. Father had often enjoyed the highest tier. I doubt anyone at this table could say the same. Then let us agree to further my good health at a future date, when my coin pouch is amenable to your terms. We drank again. I considered the matter closed, but Harrister did not. When? Sorry? When will you have the coin? The man was a dog at a stick. I can't say for sure. Maybe a few weeks, unless I make a big purchase. And where's the apothecary? Wallace will find you. Check on you. Just what I needed. It's called the Sea Stone, right on Wharf Street. It was the farthest apothecary from Loonstone I could recall. Good, Harrister finally said, settling back in his chair. Excellent. I wouldn't have a better chance. Speaking of excellent, I was struck by the singer I heard from outside just before I came in. Now I leaned forward. What was she like? Have you seen her come through? A breath of silence. I didn't see her, Harrister said, and I actually believed him. The man was focused on one thing, and it was not music. But, he continued, she did come out from the Vale. I'm sure someone saw her. It was like wind bursting through a shattered window. Ale splashed onto the table as Bren hammered his mug. She was blonde, now I've thought about it. A fair sight if you can take it from me. About your age, and cleaner. That described most girls. And how would I recognize her from a serving girl? There's nothing off with serving girls, Bren said a little stiffly. Of course, I said. But if we assumed theoretically I had to distinguish her from a crowd? Bren was mulling this over when Wallace said, Hi, master. She had a silver gown in the elder style. Fine taste, I admit. She was of usual height and in possession of a lovely singing voice. And before you ask, we don't know if she's still here or long gone. There, consider our information exhausted. Well, a well-walled well will wane and wind up waterless, as I say. They didn't know whether she'd left or not, and that meant she may still be around. She may still perform tonight. She could walk out from the door beside the stage at any time. I could still see her. I knew I would. But not tonight, it seemed. Though I stayed for several hours, the mystery girl made no appearance. My eyes wandered up the tiers time and time again in fruitless search. I may have stayed until the morning if it wasn't for Peric. The foreigner, husband of Lady Reeve, sat at gold, of course. His finances had covered the Vale. His table held noblemen and craftsmen alike, all engaged in spirited conversation. Except him. He scanned the room with the intensity of one sighting an arrow, occasionally pausing to stare for blinkless seconds. He did not appear to be one of the richest, most powerful men in Woden, or even in the whole fief of Meuse. He was. He was the windfall behind Lady Reeve's sudden ascent into the upper strata of nobility. She left Woden a widow and returned married and grossly rich. Wealth of that sort drew rumors, questions. Where did Peric Reeve get his gold? I asked. Harrister chuckled, cheeks now quite rosy. I've heard stories, boy. Hard knowing what to believe about a man like that. Odd sort. But my theory says. I didn't hear the theory, because I felt a finger turn my head and lift it toward the high tier, and there, staring at me through the forest of tables and people, was Peric Reeve.